So I will move right into part two. Um, those who were me, this was the most difficult section of the book to write. Much of it was already written, and I just went back to it and sort of updated it uh, because a lot of it was written when I was younger, and I thought, I'm older, I can do better than this now, so a lot of it was updated. But this is the personal section, and this section, the background here is basically that I grew up in a very small town called Bryan, Ohio. There are a lot of good people in that town, but it is what we would consider, a lot of us on this call are, from like Lakewood and Cleveland, and we're obviously in, a blue bubble. This is what would be considered a dark red bubble. There the church that I went to growing up, I didn't have a choice. I had to go to church 3 times a week. It was a fundamentalist Baptist church. And when I was sitting in church around the age, for me, when I started to develop, secondary sexual characteristics, but also, mentally started to develop sexually. It was pretty early for me. I was, about 12 years old. And I was sitting, in the pews of this church and listening to how people like me were going to hell. Um, and it's difficult to describe what that does to somebody at that age. You're an incredibly vulnerable and formative age. And really, at that age, how it internalized for me was that I became terrified all the time. Which produced anxiety, and a very heightened level of it. I was always on guard, that, somebody was going to know or somebody was going to find out, what I was thinking in my head. Um, and I even became, sort of neurotically fearful that people could hear my thoughts. And I think that came a lot from, thinking that maybe God could hear my thoughts. But when I was 12 years old, was the first time I remember thinking that it would be easier to be dead. And that concept is captured in the book. Again, I'm not going to read that poem. It's a very short poem. It's called Bleach. Um, and that is captured within that poem, that feeling, at the age of 12. So as I started to get a little bit older than 12, I turned to achievement as a coping mechanism and as a means of seeking approval from elders. But no matter how good I was or how much I achieved, I still felt evil inside. And achievement became a mask. And while there are great side effects of achieving, doing well in high school, participating, things like that, it was not a healthy coping mechanism or state of mind. There's another poem in the book about this period of my life called Unbelievable, Unbelievable. And um, I describe it as seeking constant absolution through success. And this is what got me through high school, along with some great friends and teachers. And a lot of the people around me at this time probably had no idea what was even going on in my head because, I was masking this through achievement and also through humor. I was sort of clownish, like a class clown trying to make everybody laugh all the time. That was another means of trying to mask. But very soon, the psychological effects were about to catch up. So on to college, I met my first gay friends, which was a very weird experience to me because I didn't know anybody else, who was gay growing up in my hometown. And I also met my first young love, but I wasn't obviously because of my past, I wasn't psychologically all together at this time. But all of these people became very important and consequential in my life. So when I met, my first young love, I finally had somebody who loved me and ultimately didn't work out. And this was sort of the major trigger for me for the clinical depression. because I was desperately searching for love and acceptance at that time. And I did not have it up until then. And then to have it and to lose it was devastating. And it was sort of the last straw, from my life up to that point. And I ended up giving up, and at that point, clinical depression set in. I went from a 3.9 GPA in college, still having been in that sort of masking through success. And then the next semester, I got a 0.5 GPA. I couldn't get out of bed. The the uh, the depression was debilitating. Um, and at the age of 20, it ultimately resulted in a nearly successful suicide attempt. And like I said, I'm not a religious person, but it's probably the closest thing that if you are a religious person, you may consider a miracle, was that, my attempt came at a time when I had roommates, everyone was gone, I was at home alone. And a friend of mine who didn't live with me ended up deciding to just come over and check on me. And all the lights were off in the house, and he knocked on the door. There was no answer. He started to walk away. Something told him to go back, and he sort of pushed. It was a very heavy door that always seemed like it was locked. And he sort of tried it, and then he couldn't. He didn't open it. Thought maybe it was locked, and then he pushed it open. And he came in and he found me in time, unconscious. And of course, then, we went to the hospital where I was in a coma for a little while. And then, of course, ended up, in a psychiatric facility for a little while after that. So I'm sorry this part was so depressing, but this is part of the story. And I think it's an important part of the story to tell, because I know I'm not the only one. I'm not, unfortunately, not a unique example. And so with that, I'm going to read you one of the poems. Um, and this one I have never read out loud before. If I need a second, I'll just put my finger up, okay? And I'll tell you when I'm done. All right. The March of the Beast. He was swallowed by a beast, born the same as Athena, from a pregnant pain inside, stealing pieces of flesh and sanity from its captive host, ingesting and gestating, devouring every chemical responsible for joy, until he was bruised and bedridden and settling for his own salt water. And the beast would sing from the inside in screeching cacophonies, "Why do you starve that African boy? Why do you torture those homeless strays? You worthless shit, feed me, you worthless shit." His hands no longer his own, they could not brew or serve or sustain, for the beast preferred its tendons rare and atrophied. Sing, my beast, my Oedipus, sing. And when it was birthed, he looked upon it and wept. Guilty for what he had made, what it had brought him to be. So he would compose a march of single strain and snare, the lore of the apostle, to lead them down the hatch, those little green serpents, one by one, then two by two, slithering inward and downward to keep the beast at bay, to finally fade away.